Welcome back. Let's set up our event notification here. And this is not the challenge file. This is the solution file. Look at that. All right, here we go. It says solution right there. It must be the solution file. Now, since this uses Service Broker, we do have to create some plumbing in our database. And we're doing the plumbing in the Watcher database because we want the Watcher database to be where the event notification data ends up. So it makes sense. I'm going to enable broker. And on this enable broker command, I'm saying with rollback immediate. You don't have to do that. With rollback immediate says, if anyone is doing anything in this database, kill them and roll it back so I can go forward. Otherwise, I have to wait for commands using this database to complete for broker to enable. Now, I'm kind of assuming, I like to, if I am going to do something with an event notification, I like to put it in its own database that's quite isolated so that I don't have to do something like set enable broker with rollback immediate in a busy database. And also just if I have to troubleshoot it, I want it to be kind of in its own isolated place if possible as well. In that database, I am in the notification watcher database. I am going to create a queue, which I'm naming notify queue. And then I'm going to create a service on the queue. This is all part of the plumbing. And you'll notice that I hit an error here. Now, I hit an error here because I copied this command from Books Online. In Books Online, right now, hopefully I'll put in a request to fix this. Right now on Books Online, it specifies this schema. This schema says, hey, this is how I describe event notifications. This is the contract for event notifications. And when I run this, I get this message that says, I cannot find that contract by this name. Either it doesn't exist or you don't have permission. Well, let's take a look at the contracts that we have. If we select from sys.service contracts, we can see the contracts installed on the SQL Server. And this is particularly confusing because it looks like it's going out to the internet, right? This is a URL. So it looks like, hey, it's not going out to the internet. These contracts come with the SQL Server. And if I look at sys.service contracts, you may notice that, in fact, I do have one for post-event notification, but it's HTTP. It's not HTTPS. I think that someone ran a find and replace script on Books Online and replaced all the HTTPs with HTTPS or something like that because this contract is named HTTP. And this is one of the reasons that in the challenge file for this, I linked folks to Jonathan Cahias' article on SQL Server Central because his article does not have this mistake in it. Now I'm going to go ahead and create this with HTTP. I'm going to actually refer to the contract that exists in my SQL Server. And sure enough, that completes successfully. So I'll put in a documentation, pull request in Books Online to see if we can get that fixed. Next up, let's go back. We have created our queue. We have now created our service on the queue, and now we need to create a route. And this is all just the inner plumbings of Service Broker. So now our route, this is all happening on my local service, or local SQL Server instance, rather. I'm not networking together a bunch of SQL Server instances. I've got one instance. So I'm saying this thing is local. I'm using notify service. And now I can create my event notification. When I create my event notification, I say, where do I want to create it? I want to create it on this server. I want to create this for multiple databases. I'm creating it for create table, alter table, drop table, and rename. And I'm mapping it to the service notify service in the current database because I am still in our Watcher database. So I'm going to create my event notification there. If I want to drop this, I have to specify on server in the drop. When I create a server level event notification, if I want to get rid of it, I have to drop it on the server as well. If I uncomment this and I just say, the note can stay commented. If I just say drop event notification, right? It's like, what? Wait, what? I need to say where to drop it. So if I drop it on the server, it does actually get dropped. Let's go ahead and recreate that because we want to go ahead and test it. Okay, so we've got an event notification created. Let's test and see, is this thing working? Now my queue is named notify queue. I mean, at this point, if you've never used this before, you're like, how do I even know if it's working? Let's see, we can select from notify queue. Right now, notify queue is empty. And what is notify queue? Let's go back up. When I defined this whole thing, I created a queue named notify queue. There is a service on that queue, and there is a route that defines, hey, this is all happening locally. And then the event notification is on the service. So you can kind of see the plumbing together. But notify queue, I can select from that like it's a table, because it's kind of a special kind of behind the scenes table. Well, let's run some sample activity. So I'm going to go back to the challenge file. I'm going to open my recent file. Let's open our challenge file here. And let's go to our sample activity down here that happens in SQL Challenge event notification. And I'm going to go ahead and run this activity. And, I'm creating a table, I'm altering, I'm dropping, I'm doing all this stuff. I get my warning that if I rename things, anything using the old name isn't going to work. That's all normal. And there's still nothing in my queue. Now notice that these commands succeeded. I mean, this is part of the good thing about event notifications. Things are loosely coupled. So these commands, even though something's not right, even though my event notification, nothing's showing up in the queue, these commands didn't fail. With DDL triggers, the DDL trigger becomes part of the transaction. So if anything goes wrong, these don't work, right? Which, if that's what you're going for, that's a good thing. But for most of us, that's not what we're going for. In many situations, we don't want our logging to potentially make it fail. It all depends on what are your requirements for this logging, really. But in this case, they are loosely coupled. So these commands were able to go forward even though something's not right. If your event notification isn't working, the first place that I would look for that is your SQL Server log. So in here, I am now under Management and then SQL Server logs. We want to look at the error log, and we want to look at the most recent one. Oftentimes, if your event notification is failing, oftentimes the reason will be in this log. And if we look here, sure enough, there's a message that says an exception occurred while enqueuing a message in the target queue. Well, what's that? Could not obtain information about Windows NT group user derp Kendar. Wait, what? Well, that is, we are part of the derp domain, and my test environment is in the derp domain. And in the derp domain, my username is Kendar. I believe in misspelling my name in the derp domain. So that's absolutely normal, but this exception's kind of weird. Yeah, the first time I did this, it took me a little while to figure it out. Here's what the issue is. If we look at the Notification Watcher database, if I look at the properties of my Notification Watcher database and I look at the owner in the GUI, the owner of this database is derp/Kendar. When I created this database, by default, it made my user the database owner. And this can become a sticky issue with event notifications. In this case, I actually don't even have my domain controller on in my test environment. And it's like, I don't know who that is because it's trying to validate who I am as part of this event notification. Like I mentioned, service broker can be a little wackadoodle. So to watch how this fixes this error, I am now running an alter authorization command on the database, and I'm changing the owner. If I go back here and I look at my properties again, what I've now done is I've changed the owner to the built-in SA account. I'm going to rerun my activity and we'll see if it works there. So I have altered my authorization there. And right now I've only done this on the Watcher database. So let's see if that alone can fix it, right? I have another command here that does it on the event notification database. The event notification database is where the activity is happening. The Watcher database is where it's being recorded. So right now I've just changed it on the one that's being recorded. So I go ahead and rerun my activity. Do I have anything in my notify queue table? Yes, I do. So to get it working, I actually only needed to change the database owner on the database where I have the event notification installed where the activity is being logged. I like to be consistent. I actually, the way I was raised, So when I first became a DBA, it was just one of our practices to change the owners on all our databases. So I do like to be consistent about it. I also just don't want SQL Server every time this fires. I personally just don't want it trying to figure out, hey, who is that user? Can I talk to the domain controller? So I prefer cleaning this up on this database, and then I prefer just standardizing it when possible, just to avoid the entire issue. It's up to you how you handle it. But yeah, this is one of the little gotchas that comes in with event notifications there. But now I do have things in Notify Queue. So if I look at Notify Queue, I now have 12 rows, right? I'm doing 6 commands and I'm running them twice. So if I run my set of test commands again, I should now have 18 rows in my queue. And my queue, Notify Queue, is just going to keep building up commands until I do something about it. I need to receive commands from this queue and process them, or this system table that just holds these is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, I could leave them in there forever, but then I'd probably run into other problems. So what I really want to do is I want to put them into a table, and then I want to set up my own grooming procedures for that table so that I don't, depending on how many things I log, I don't want it to just grow and grow and grow. I want to set up a grooming for that. Receiving messages. So Jonathan's article is a great resource. This is that SQL Server Central article on capturing these. He also has information about receiving them in there as well. We can close our error log now. We don't need that anymore. But there's code that we can use it's similar to the event notification code in many ways in terms of how the data is shredded, because these are the exact same events that we're collecting them. We're just collecting them by a different method than how we collect them for DDL triggers. The way we process them is similar. I am setting up a table variable. You could use a temp table if you wanted. I'm using a table variable here named messages, and I'm putting the message data in it. It's an XML data type. So I've got one column named message data. Then after I've got that created, the receive command says, okay, receive things from this queue into this table variable. Then I'm going to go ahead and parse things and put them into my DDL watcher table. So I've put things into my table variable. I'm now going to select from my table variable. I'm going to do all of my nasty X query here, which is just the same as my nasty X query was on DDL triggers. And then I'm going to insert it into the DDL Watcher table. And then after that's done, I can select from DDL Watcher. I can do whatever I want from DDL Watcher. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this block of code from the table variable forward. Not going to accidentally delete it, or I'm going to undo my accidental deletion. And when I run that, it put all 18 rows first into the table variable and now into my actual table. So now after I've run this, I have 18 rows in DDL Watcher, 18 rows there. So if we go down to the bottom, I have 18 rows here. And now that I've received rows, if I go back up and look at my Notify Queue, I received rows out of there, so there's no longer anything in Notify Queue anymore because I received all those rows, I put them in the other table. Now let's do our final test here, our low permission user test. What if it is a low permission user who's doing this activity? And I say low permission, they have permissions in the SQLChallenge event notification database. They do not have any permissions in the Watcher database. They're not a sysadmin. So they're not really a low permission user, right? They have plenty of permissions in this one database. So when Stormy does these, Stormy's commands succeed. And when I look at Notify Queue, like, we don't have the same issues. I didn't have to grant public. I didn't have to grant insert to this table. This activity did get picked up here. Now, I can't really read it too well in this format, right? Because this is just like the queue information. What I want to get is I want to get the message data out of here, and I'm going to do that when I receive it. Let's go ahead and run the query that receives this. This could be automated in different ways. You could either have you could put this in a stored procedure that's run by an agent job, or you could get a little fancier and have it happen automatically as rows go in here. I'm going to go ahead and run it there. We just get 6 rows into the table variable and then into the table. And now when I look at the DDL washer table, if I look at the last set of 6 rows, those were done by Stormy. I can see my old object name and new object name are set properly, and I have all of the details as well there. So event notifications can be great. I think they can be really useful. And honestly, if I needed to set this up, if I wanted to set something up like this pretty quickly in a dev or test environment for some troubleshooting, I would probably go the event notification route personally, because I like this being loosely coupled for the purposes of troubleshooting. When it comes to a production environment, make sure that you know, okay, what are the requirements in general, and do either a DDL trigger or an event notification fit that? Because these can be disabled by administrators. They're not going to fit every case. But knowing, do we want the logging command to be part of the transaction itself? So that if the logging fails, the transaction fails, that is a key deciding factor to, do you want to go with a DDL trigger or do you want to go with an event notification? However, whenever you sign up for an event notifications, you are signing up to do long-term support for Service Broker. Not everybody's favorite thing to do, right? So some folks just say, I don't really want to use Service Broker for the long term, so I'm going to buy a vendor app that does this because it's better for our organization to spend money on something that kind of has the support built in rather than to take on this technology that isn't widely used in SQL Server. And that is a valid choice because it does cost organizations money to support features long term. So lots to think about when it comes to these two features. I hope you've enjoyed this SQL challenge. I'm Kendra Little from SQL Workbooks, and I'll see you again in another challenge soon. Bye, folks.